The room fell silent before anyone understood why. A single voice, rough with age but firm enough to cut through every whispered prayer, echoed across the funeral chapel. "Don't close the coffin." The priest froze. The two men preparing to lower the lid stopped in the middle of the movement. Dozens of grieving faces turned toward the entrance. Standing in the open doorway was an elderly man wearing a faded gray coat that looked at least 20 years old. Rain dripped slowly from its sleeves onto the polished wooden floor. His silver hair was soaked, his hands trembled slightly from exhaustion, yet his eyes were unnervingly calm. He wasn't looking at the mourners. He wasn't looking at the priest. He was staring directly at the man lying inside the coffin. Then he spoke again. "The man you're burying stole my life." The words landed like an explosion. Someone gasped. A woman dropped a bouquet of white lilies. An elderly relative crossed herself instinctively. For several endless seconds, nobody moved. Then a quiet voice broke the silence. "Dad?" The word came from the front row. Andrew Lavrov, 40 years old, stood frozen beside the coffin, his face drained of color. He hadn't meant to say it aloud. It had simply escaped him. Because the impossible had just walked into the room. The man standing at the entrance looked exactly like someone Andrew had buried 20 years earlier, or believed he had buried. "No," whispered his mother, Irene. She slowly rose from her chair. Her hands shook so violently that she had to grip the backrest to keep herself from collapsing. "No, this can't be." Her eyes filled with tears she hadn't shed even while saying goodbye to her husband only minutes earlier. The stranger looked at her. For a brief moment, the years disappeared. Neither of them spoke. They didn't have to. Everyone else saw two strangers. They saw recognition, deep, painful, unmistakable. The priest cleared his throat. "I'm sorry, sir," he said carefully. "This is a private ceremony." The old man never looked away from Irene. "It was my family first." The sentence sent another wave of confusion through the room. Viktor Lavrov, the respected businessman, philanthropist, husband, father, and grandfather, was the man lying inside the coffin. His funeral had gathered nearly everyone in the town. Business partners, former employees, neighbors, friends, people who owed him favors, and people who secretly hated him. To most of them, Victor had been successful, disciplined, and surprisingly generous. To others, he had always seemed like a man carrying a burden nobody could see. Now, even in death, that burden seemed to have followed him. Andrew stepped forward. "Who are you?" The old man finally shifted his gaze toward him. For several seconds, he simply studied Andrew's face, as though counting every wrinkle, every scar, every year that had passed. Then something almost invisible crossed his expression. Regret. "You've grown older than I ever imagined." Andrew frowned. "I asked who you are." The stranger smiled sadly. "When I last saw you, you were 8 years old." A ripple of whispers spread through the chapel. Andrew's fists tightened. "I don't know you." "You should." The old man slowly raised his right hand. Without saying a word, he tapped his thumb against the center of his palm. Once, twice, 3 times. Andrew's breathing stopped. His mother stared in disbelief. Nobody else reacted. To everyone else, it looked like a meaningless habit. But Andrew knew. His biological father had always done that before saying something important. It had been a silly little ritual from childhood, something no outsider could possibly know. Andrew had copied it for years without realizing why. Only after his father's supposed death had the habit disappeared. Until now. Andrew whispered, his voice cracked. "That's impossible." "It should be." The room became unbearably quiet. Marina, Andrew's younger sister, stepped beside him. Unlike her brother, she had always believed emotions should be hidden behind kindness. She looked at the old man with cautious curiosity. "If you're trying to scam this family," she said softly, "this is the cruelest day you could have chosen." "I know." "Then why are you here?" "Because he died before telling you the truth." She looked toward the coffin. "You knew Victor?" "I knew him better than anyone." Another silence, this one heavier than the last. Victor and Irene had been married for 15 years. Everyone knew that, but very few people remembered that before Victor, there had been another husband, Alex Carter, officially declared dead after a car fire 2 decades earlier. His burned vehicle had been found outside the city, a body inside. The investigation concluded within weeks. Death certificate issued, funeral held, life moved on. Or at least everyone pretended it had. The old man took one slow step forward. My name, he paused, almost as if saying it out loud hurt, is Alex. The name spread through the room like cold water. Several elderly guests exchanged horrified looks. One woman began crying quietly. A former neighbor whispered, "It can't be." Another answered, "I was at his funeral." So was I. Irene closed her eyes. For 20 years, she had replayed that funeral in her memory. The closed coffin, the unbearable smell of smoke lingering around the cemetery, the rain that had refused to stop, Victor standing beside her, supporting her weight because she couldn't stand alone. Everything about that day had felt real. So how could the dead now stand 10 feet away? Andrew looked back and forth between the stranger and the coffin. His entire childhood suddenly felt unstable. Every memory, every photograph, every story, every answer he had ever accepted. "If you're really Alex," he asked quietly, "where have you been for 20 years?" The old man's expression darkened. "I spent 20 years trying to come home." "Why didn't you?" "I wasn't allowed." The room erupted. "What does that mean?" "Who stopped you?" "Who are you talking about?" Alex didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slowly walked toward the coffin. No one dared stop him. He stood beside Victor's body. For nearly half a minute, he simply stared at the lifeless face of the man who had once been his closest friend. There was no hatred in his eyes, only unbearable exhaustion. Then he finally spoke. "The man lying here wasn't always my enemy." Every person in the chapel leaned forward. "He was my best friend." Gasps echoed across the room. Andrew stared at his mother. She looked away. "You knew?" he whispered. Tears rolled down Irene's cheeks. "I knew they had once been friends. But you never told us." "I thought it no longer mattered." Alex let out a bitter laugh. "It mattered every single day." The priest quietly stepped back. Even he understood that this funeral was no longer about saying goodbye. It had become something else, something much darker. Alex reached into the inside pocket of his old coat. Instantly, several people tensed. Andrew instinctively moved between him and the coffin. "What are you doing?" Alex slowly pulled out a worn leather envelope. Its edges were cracked with age. Across the front, written in faded handwriting, were only 4 words. "Open after my death." The handwriting belonged to Victor. Alex looked at Andrew. "I didn't come here to destroy your family." He placed the envelope gently on the coffin. "I came because your father finally ran out of time." Every eye in the room fixed on the weathered envelope. No one noticed that. In the very last row of the chapel, Victor's younger brother lowered his head, not in grief, but in fear. And for the first time since the funeral began, someone silently wished the dead had stayed buried. Nobody touched the envelope. It rested quietly on top of Viktor Lavrov's coffin, its cracked leather stained by years of travel, secrets, and silence. The handwritten words across the front seemed almost unreal. "Open after my death." No one spoke. Even the rain outside appeared to soften, as though the world itself had stopped to listen. Andrew was the first to move. He reached toward the envelope but hesitated just before his fingers touched it. His entire life had been built on certainty. His father had died 20 years ago. Victor had raised him. His mother had eventually found happiness again. The past was painful, but complete. Now, in less than 5 minutes, every certainty had fallen apart. "Who gave this to you?" Andrew finally asked without looking at Alex. Alex answered quietly. "Victor did." Several people exchanged confused glances. "That's impossible," Marina said. "He died 3 days ago." "He handed it to me 6 months ago." Every head turned toward Alex again. Andrew frowned. "If you've been in contact with Victor, why didn't you come sooner?" Alex lowered his eyes. "Because he begged me not to." The answer only deepened the mystery. Why would he ask something like that? Alex looked at Victor's lifeless face. Because he knew someone else was still watching. The temperature inside the chapel suddenly seemed to drop. "What do you mean, watching?" someone whispered from the back. Alex didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slowly picked up the envelope and offered it to Andrew. "It belongs to you now." Andrew stared at it for several long seconds. Then he carefully broke the old wax seal. Inside was a single handwritten letter. The paper had yellowed with age. Victor's handwriting remained unmistakable. Andrew swallowed hard before reading aloud. If you are reading this, then Alex has returned, and I am no longer alive. A quiet murmur spread through the room. If that day has come, understand one thing before you judge either of us. Andrew paused. His voice had already begun to shake. The story you know is not the story that happened. Silence. Absolute silence. 20 years ago, Alex did not abandon his family. Irene closed her eyes. A tear slipped down her cheek. And I did not betray him for money. Several guests glanced toward one another. For years, rumors had circulated throughout town. Some believed Victor had secretly stolen Alex's company after his disappearance. Others claimed Irene had fallen in love with Victor long before Alex supposedly died. Neither accusation had ever been proven. Now Victor himself was denying one of them. But if money wasn't the reason, then what was? Andrew continued reading. There was a third man. The sentence echoed through the chapel. Nobody breathed. Everything that followed began because of him. Andrew looked up. Who is he? Alex remained completely still. I don't know. The answer surprised everyone. You don't know? Marina repeated. I spent 20 years trying to find out. Andrew continued reading. If I reveal his name too early, innocent people may still die. Someone in the audience whispered nervously. This doesn't make any sense. The priest quietly sat down. The funeral had long since stopped being a funeral. It had become something else, something no one could have imagined. Andrew read the next lines more slowly. If Alex is standing beside you, believe only what can be proven. He stopped. His eyes narrowed. Believe only what can be proven? Alex nodded. Victor never wanted blind trust. You expect us to trust a dead man's letter instead? No, Alex answered. I expect you to question all of us. That answer unsettled everyone. Most people accused others. Very few invited suspicion upon themselves. Marina stepped closer. If you're innocent, she hesitated. Why didn't you fight your way back home? Alex smiled without happiness. You think I didn't try? He slowly rolled up the sleeve of his coat. A long scar stretched across his forearm. Another disappeared beneath his wrist. They caught me the first time. He rolled up the other sleeve. Another scar. Older. Deeper. The second attempt cost someone else his life. Nobody spoke. Alex looked directly at Irene. They sent me his photograph afterward. She covered her mouth. They wanted me to understand. Andrew stared at the scars. They looked real. Too real to fake. But scars alone proved nothing. Or did they? Before anyone could ask another question, a voice came from the last row. This is ridiculous. Everyone turned. It was Victor's younger brother, Sergei. Unlike everyone else, he didn't appear shocked. He looked irritated, almost angry. We're standing here listening to ghost stories while my brother is lying in a coffin. Alex's eyes locked onto him immediately. For the first time since entering the chapel, his calm expression hardened. I remember you. Sergei forced a laugh. I doubt that. I remember more than you think. The room filled with uncomfortable silence. Andrew noticed something strange. Sergei wasn't looking at Alex. He was looking at the letter, specifically at the final page. His eyes remained fixed there for just a second too long. Andrew folded the pages closed. What aren't you telling us, Uncle? Sergei shrugged. Nothing. Then why do you suddenly want this conversation to end? I don't. You do. I said I don't. The exchange grew tense. Marina stepped between them. This isn't helping. No, Andrew replied without taking his eyes off Sergei. But maybe it's revealing something. Sergei let out an impatient sigh. You've known me your entire life. And maybe that's exactly the problem. The accusation hung heavily in the air. Irene suddenly spoke. Enough. Everyone looked at her. She had barely said a word since Alex arrived. Her voice trembled. I buried one husband 20 years ago. She looked toward Alex. Now I discover he was alive. Then she turned toward Victor's coffin. And today I'm burying another. She wiped away another tear. I can't survive another lie. Her words struck every person in the room. Even Sergei looked away. Alex quietly stepped closer. Irene? She raised her hand, stopping him. Answer only one question. He nodded. When you disappeared, her voice cracked. Did you ever stop trying to come back? Alex's eyes filled with tears for the first time. Not for a single day. Irene broke down. Years of grief, guilt, confusion, and hope collided all at once. Marina rushed to hold her mother. Andrew stood frozen, unable to comfort anyone because he no longer knew what was true. His father was dead. His father was alive. Both statements somehow existed at the same time. Then Andrew looked down once more at Victor's letter. A folded sheet remained inside the envelope, smaller than the others. He hadn't noticed it before. Carefully, he unfolded it. It wasn't a letter. It was a key. Taped beneath it was a single handwritten sentence. Everything you need to know is waiting inside deposit box 417. No bank name, no address, only a number. As everyone tried to understand what it meant, Andrew noticed something that made his blood run cold. Across the room, Sergei had gone completely pale. Not because Alex had returned, not because Victor's letter had been read, but because he recognized that key. And in that single moment, Andrew realized one terrifying possibility. His uncle hadn't been surprised by today's revelations. He had been afraid of them. For several long seconds, no one spoke. The small brass key lay in Andrew's trembling hand. Deposit box, 417. Nothing more. No bank, no address, no explanation. Yet one person in the chapel reacted as though he had seen a loaded gun. Sergei, Victor's younger brother. His face had gone pale. Not the pale color of grief, the pale color of recognition. Andrew noticed it immediately. So you know what this opens? Sergei recovered faster than expected. I've never seen that key before. It was a convincing lie. Unfortunately for him, Alex had already noticed something else. When Sergei denied recognizing the key, his eyes never looked at Andrew. They looked at the number, 417, as if he had memorized it years ago. Alex quietly stepped forward. You're still a terrible liar. Sergei's jaw tightened. I've had enough of this. He turned toward the exit. I'm leaving. You can't. Andrew's voice stopped him. Not until we know why you're afraid. Sergei laughed. It sounded forced. Afraid? Your father's funeral has turned into a circus because of a stranger. I'm not the stranger here, Alex replied. You are. Silence settled over the chapel once again. Then the family lawyer cleared his throat. There is only one bank in town that still uses numbered private deposit boxes. Everyone looked at him. It belonged to Victor. Andrew closed his eyes for a second. My father planned this. The lawyer nodded. He renewed the lease every year without fail. For 20 years? Marina asked. Every single year. Nobody understood why a man would faithfully pay for a safety deposit box he never seemed to visit. Unless he knew someone would eventually open it. Less than an hour later, the funeral procession had transformed into something entirely different. Instead of driving to the cemetery, a small group headed toward the old stone bank on the edge of town. Rain continued falling. No one complained. Inside the bank, the elderly manager listened quietly as Andrew explained the situation. The moment he saw Victor's signature on the authorization papers, he became unusually serious. I've been expecting someone, Andrew frowned. You knew about this? The manager nodded. Mr. Lavrov came here every year. What did he say? He always asked me the same question. The manager hesitated. Has anyone come asking for box 417? And I always answered no. The old man sighed. Every year he looked disappointed. Alex lowered his head. He never stopped hoping. The manager unlocked a heavy steel door leading into the underground vault. Rows upon rows of identical metal boxes stretched along the walls. He stopped in front of one. 417. Andrew inserted the key. His hand shook. The lock clicked. Inside wasn't money. There wasn't any jewelry. No property deeds. Only three things. A thick folder, a VHS cassette, and a sealed envelope labeled, For Alex. Alex stared at it for several seconds before carefully opening it. Inside was a handwritten letter. Victor's handwriting. Steady, deliberate, almost painfully calm. Alex began reading silently. Halfway through, tears rolled down his face. Andrew had never imagined seeing a man cry like that. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like someone finally setting down a weight too heavy to carry. "What does it say?" Irene whispered. Alex took a deep breath. He apologized. Nobody answered. He said there wasn't a single day he didn't regret his decision. Alex swallowed. He wrote that if he had known there was another way, he would have taken it. Marina gently asked, "Another way to what?" Alex looked toward Victor's children. "To save all of us." The room remained silent. Then Andrew opened the thick folder. Inside were police reports, financial records, photographs, witness statements, newspaper clippings. Everything carefully organized, page after page, year after year. Victor had spent 2 decades investigating the people responsible for Alex's disappearance. He had never stopped. Near the bottom lay one final document, a signed confession. Not from Victor, from someone else. Andrew unfolded it. His breathing stopped. The signature belonged to Sergei. Every pair of eyes turned toward him. Sergei slowly stepped backward. "No." His voice barely existed. "That isn't possible." "It has your signature," Andrew said. "It's forged." Alex picked up another sheet. Bank transfers, large deposits, hidden accounts, payments stretching back almost 20 years. Every transfer led to one name, Sergei Lavrov. Marina whispered, "No." Sergei looked around desperately. "You don't understand." "Then explain." His breathing became faster. "I never wanted him dead." No one interrupted. "I only wanted the company." He laughed bitterly. "That sounds horrible now." "It was horrible then," Alex answered quietly. Sergei's shoulders collapsed. "I was drowning in debt. I knew Victor trusted you. I knew Alex trusted everyone. I told some men where Alex would be." His voice cracked. "They promised they'd scare him. Nothing more." Andrew stared at him. "You sold your own brother." "I thought I'd finally matter." Silence. "I spent my whole life standing in Victor's shadow." His confession continued almost uncontrollably. "He was smarter. He was richer. He was respected. I was always second." He covered his face. "I hated him for it." Alex looked at him with exhausted sadness rather than anger. "You destroyed 4 lives because you couldn't live with your own." Sergei collapsed into a chair. "I know." "No." Alex shook his head. "You've only just begun to know." Police sirens echoed outside the bank. The manager had quietly called them the moment the confession became undeniable. Sergei didn't resist. He simply stood, held out his hands, and allowed the officers to place them in handcuffs. As they led him away, he stopped beside Victor's photograph hanging inside the folder. "I wanted your life?" His voice barely carried. "I never realized how much it would cost." Then he disappeared through the doorway. The room remained completely silent. For the first time all day, there were no more secrets. Or so everyone believed. Andrew reached into the deposit box one final time. His fingers touched something hidden beneath the false bottom. A photograph. Old, faded. He pulled it out. It showed Victor and Alex standing shoulder to shoulder in front of their very first construction site. Both smiling, both young. On the back, written in Victor's handwriting, were just 2 sentences. "If this photograph survives longer than we do, tell my children they were always yours. I was only borrowing the privilege of raising them." The words shattered what little emotional control remained. Andrew stared at the photograph for a long time. Victor had never tried to erase Alex. He had spent 20 years protecting his place, not replacing it. Andrew slowly walked toward Alex. The room seemed to disappear around them. For a moment, neither man spoke. 20 years of absence could never be recovered. Birthdays had been missed, graduations, Christmas mornings, late-night conversations, first heartbreaks. There was no miracle capable of giving those years back. Finally, Andrew stopped in front of him. "I don't know how to call you," Alex smiled sadly. "You don't have to call me anything. I wasn't there." "No. You already had someone." Andrew looked toward Victor's photograph. "I had a father." He looked back at Alex. "And now I know I have another." Without another word, he stepped forward and embraced him. Alex closed his eyes, not because 20 years had disappeared, but because for the first time in 20 years, he had finally come home. Outside, the rain had stopped. Clouds slowly opened above the cemetery, waiting in the distance. Later that afternoon, Viktor Lavrov was finally buried. This time, there were no unanswered questions, only complicated truths. Some mourned the man who had made an unforgivable decision. Others honored the man who had spent the rest of his life trying to repay it. No one left believing that heroes were perfect or villains were born evil. Sometimes one selfish choice destroys countless lives. Sometimes one impossible sacrifice saves them. And sometimes the greatest act of love is accepting that forgiveness can exist without forgetting. As the last handful of earth fell onto the coffin, Andrew looked once at Victor's grave and once at Alex standing beside him. He realized something that would stay with him forever. Family is not defined only by blood, nor only by the years spent together. Sometimes it is defined by the people who spend their entire lives carrying the consequences of one decision made in a single terrible moment. And that is why the man everyone believed had returned from the dead had never truly come back for revenge. He had come back for the truth, because the truth, no matter how deeply it is buried, always finds its way home, finds its